Question before we start. Have you ever decided you are going to bed early because you are now a person with healthy habits? Phone away, lights off. Then you think, I'll just watch one reel. And suddenly it's 3 a.m. You now know how to restore antique furniture. Your alarm goes off at 6, and your brain says, lovely, 3 hours, plenty. Yeah? Then you're in the right place. You're listening to the Spacious Brain podcast, where real neurodivergent humans with real jobs and real daily chaos overshare with pride. Minus the glossy, my ADHD is my superpower nonsense. Hi, I'm Noemi, a scientist, a neurodiversity coach. Yes, someone who will absolutely derail into a story from when I was 12 because I'm ADHD and tangents are my love language. If you ever felt alone or felt like the Temu version of neurodivergent because you're not an entrepreneur, not a CEO, and you forget to eat and drink on the same day, you're in the right place. Let's keep this real. In this episode, I'm joined by James. James is a writer, counsellor, father of two, and late diagnosed AuDHD human with a deep love of honest conversations and occasionally the dopamine hit of buying 5 records when one would have been plenty. In this episode, we talk about the slow burn journey of recognizing autism after his son's diagnosis, the unexpected ADHD realization that followed, and the strange relief of finally having language for a life that had always felt slightly out of sync. James shared what it felt like to grow up socially adjacent, to build a career around a special interest, to struggle when work moved further away from what suited his brain, and to eventually retrain as a counselor supporting autistic clients. We also talk about regulation, parenting while neurodivergent, the emotional cost of masking, therapy that misunderstands autism, and why finding people who get it can become a lifeline. And at the center of it all sits the message behind James' counseling practice: you are enough. Exactly as you are. No software update required. Hi, James. Thank you so much for being
Hiya.
with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
I'll start with the usual question. Who is James?
Well, that's the question. So, yeah, James is a 45-year-old ADHD father of 2. I'm a writer and a counsellor.
What made you want to share your story on this podcast?
Because I think it's really important for people who are autistic or ADHD or anything like this to share their stories, because it's through stories that people like us kind of find ourselves. It's through other people's stories that I kind of gain the confidence to explore my own kind of neurodivergence. So, yeah, I think it's important.
And when were you diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed as autistic in 2023 and then with ADHD about 6 months later.
And how was that process for you? So how did that realization started with the autism, and then what brought you to seek like another diagnosis for
Yeah.
the ADHD?
So my autism diagnosis was a slow burn kind of realization. It started with my oldest son being diagnosed a few years earlier than that. Because before that, my knowledge about autism was not a lot. It was the standard things that you see in the media. So that was what autism was, and didn't see how it applied to me in any way. So even when my son was diagnosed, there was still no real spark. It wasn't like an immediate light being turned on, like, oh my God, that's my life. It took longer than that. And it took researching and reading to try and improve my knowledge so I could be more useful as a father to him. And I just started seeing more and more of myself in it. So yeah, it took some reflecting and kind of the courage to actually take that step to seek a diagnosis came from a Facebook group that I was in. So my son's in an autistic charity called Spectrum Gaming, which is based in Greater Manchester, and they work with young people through gaming and in-person meetups, and it's an amazing charity. So the parents of kids in that charity have like a Facebook group where we can share our experiences. So I asked on there, has anyone else sought kind of their own diagnosis based on having their kids diagnosed? And the response was overwhelming. There's just so many people came back and said, yeah, I've been through that exact journey, because the genetic side of autism is becoming so much more clear, that many autistic children have undiagnosed or late diagnosed autistic parents. It seems to be how it works. So yeah, that gave me the confidence to pursue it myself. So yeah, that process worked well. I was able to use a loan scheme at my employer to pay for a private autistic diagnosis. Otherwise, I'd probably still be here waiting. I had initially tried to go through the NHS. I'd had a quick conversation with my GP over the phone, and I hadn't heard anything. I think I might still be waiting. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, went through it was an online assessment, 3 sessions, and it was really very kind of positive, very neuroaffirming. And I came out of it, with the diagnosis and feeling very pleased and relieved to have that, which I think is quite common for late diagnosed people, is that you do a lot of research, you look into this, question it, you have that imposter syndrome, and then you actually get the diagnosis, and it's validation, because if you don't get it, you come out thinking, well, what am I then? What's going on? How did I identify so strongly with this? And now I've been told it's not that. And I know people who've been through that experience too, who have come out without the diagnosis, and it just leaves you kind of hanging. So yeah, it was a relief and a validation and a chance to kind of start the longer journey of acceptance, I guess.
And what happened with the ADHD then after? How did you come to that? Because you said the autism, it came from the realization with the journey with your son, and you started learning, and then you learned a bit more about yourself. Was it ever in your radar about the
Not at all.
ADHD?
No, it was never there. If you asked me the day after I had my autism diagnosis if I thought I also had ADHD, I would have said no, no chance. That's ridiculous. Because again, my view of ADHD was built entirely upon what you see in the media, which
Hmm.
is kind of the naughty kid in class, talking all the time, fidgeting, getting into trouble. And I was never anything like that at all. So I got the book. I can't remember the name of the book now because I've got ADHD. Ellie Middleton's first book. I got that, and initially I got it to read about the autistic parts, but it's a really well written book. So I ended up reading the ADHD parts too. And in that, she explains the different types of ADHD. So inattentive, hyperactive, and then the combined. And in the inattentive descriptions, I just saw so much of my life. So that led me to think, well, actually, maybe that is something that applies to me and something that does affect me on a daily basis. So I went through Right to Choose,
Hmm.
and was lucky enough to get an assessment really quickly. So yeah, and I came out of that with a diagnosis of inattentive ADHD.
It's interesting because you had both paths in terms of the diagnosis. So you had the private path and then you had the right to choose. And I think there is a lot recently in the media about, these private diagnosis. This is what they think that where the overdiagnosis is coming from, is from people trying to just get money, right? And then get those diagnoses out of the door. How was your experience? Did you see any difference in terms even of quality of the assessment, bearing in mind that there are two different assessments? But what was your experience?
To be honest, they were both quite similar. They're both online, but they both felt very thorough. They both felt very kind of going down the official routes of diagnosis. It didn't feel like it was just a box ticking exercise. It was very much exploring my past, my childhood, my experiences. It just felt very affirming, and I came out of it understanding myself a lot more. Obviously the overdiagnosis argument is very prevalent at the moment, very frustrating for people who've been late diagnosed in particular, I think, because you spend your life not really knowing who you are, feeling out of place, and then you find something that says, actually, this is why. And then you see the health secretary insinuating that basically it's made up nonsense. And that's, yeah,
Yeah.
it's invalidating.
And thinking about the validating thing, you mentioned before the imposter syndrome before the diagnosis, right? And did that change after you received your diagnosis? Or do you still feel sometimes, what am I doing here?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's completely gone away. I don't know if it ever will completely go away, and the media narrative plays into that. But yeah, imposter syndrome was a big thing, and it was why diagnosis was important for me because, a lot of people out there can't get the diagnosis. They can't access it financially. I couldn't have paid for it myself, and I wouldn't have paid for it myself. It was only because I was able to use the scheme and pay it back gradually, but I was able to get the private diagnosis. And yeah, the diagnosis was important for me because I wanted to be able to tell my son that I was definitely autistic. I didn't want to tell him I might be autistic too, I think, and not really believe that myself. I wanted to be able to share that with him, knowledge that it was official and it wasn't just me thinking too much about some books I'd read. So that he would know that we were sharing that thing and that was something we're going through together.
And did that change your relationship with your son? Did it help?
Yeah, I think it did. I think when I told him, he said that he kind of made sense why he found it easier to talk to me about it than other people. He felt like I got it, and that's probably because I had it. So that was why I got it. So yeah, I'm very glad I got the diagnosis.
Mm, thinking about your past and your childhood, how were you growing up? Because now that you know, like how your brain works, is there anything thinking back that it makes sense?
Yeah, especially socially. I always had some friends, but I was never, a social butterfly. I was always quite happy on my own. I'm an only child, so I spent a lot of time at home on my own, and that was my kind of happy place. And with friends, yeah, there was always felt separate from them. I enjoy being with them, but I'd also be relieved to not be with them. And in terms of how I was able to keep in touch with people over the years, makes more sense now. But I struggled with that. So yeah, socially was mainly where I felt. Looking back, that makes sense. And with the ADHD, I guess it's my struggles when I got to kind of A level and it came to a lot of revising, a lot of exams, and I think I got overwhelmed and just couldn't take in the information. I remember sitting in my room revising for exams and just staring blankly at the things I was trying to take in. I was bright, I was expected to do very well, and I didn't do very well. And it makes sense why.
Yeah. And how about your career after that, after school?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a football journalist. And I was lucky enough to go on to do a journalism degree despite my A level kind of crash out. And I came out of that going into a job doing exactly what I wanted to do, which was football journalism. And that job was perfect for me because it was an area of special interest, intense special interest. And I got to just immerse myself in that world 5 days a week and do what I was good at, which was write about it. I didn't really have to do any of the things that I'm not very good at. I would occasionally interview a footballer or an ex-footballer on the phone or in person, but very, very rarely. Mostly it was just sitting down at a computer, writing about something I cared about and found fun. So it was an ideal job for me. And it was after that job that I started to struggle more in my career because I started diversifying what I was doing and getting further and further away from my comfort zone, which was looking back where I can see the struggles with autism. I got into jobs where I had to do more socializing, more meetings, more phone calls, and getting further and further away from the core of just sitting on my own writing things. So I went through a period where I changed jobs quite a lot, just looking to find where I felt comfortable and happy without understanding what the problem was. So I jumped from one job to another job that had the same problems as the previous job because I didn't understand what the problems were. I just thought, well, problem was that job or that company. And it was just the problem was that it wasn't the right kind of job or company for me. So if I'd known, I might have made better decisions at that point.
found this really interesting because when somebody goes through the diagnosis, one of the things that they ask is, if you struggle maintaining a job. And most of the time, like the answer that I hear, like from coaching people and, from talking to other neurodivergent is, no, I don't. I don't struggle maintaining it, but and that is the thing. And I think it's really important that probably there is where the shift should start happening when during the diagnostic process, because you might not be struggling maintaining it because you got very good at masking, or because you don't know what's going on, particularly if you're looking for a diagnosis later in life. Most of the systems, that the coping mechanisms that you put in place, they will help you masking and maintaining a job. The problem is, what is the toll when you come home? What is the struggle when you come home? And I see this also in many children nowadays, particularly in young girls, at school, that they're
Yeah.
going through a diagnostic process and they're like, oh, but they're doing well at school, so it might not impact their life so much. But it cannot be the only criteria, I think. So what is your experience around that? The being able to be still successful because you've done the job that you wanted to do, but the actual issue that you have, the struggle that you have, was when you were coming home, and this thing of, oh, I need to find something else.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case for, I think, a lot of children. And I can't imagine many SEND parents haven't had that conversation with the school where you first raise the issue of, potentially autism, ADHD, and the school say, well, we don't see any of that here. They're coping fine. Yeah, they are coping fine in school. It's when they get home and they can't speak for 4 hours. They just go up to the room and lie down in the dark. And that's what the school don't see, so things don't change. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've reflected on. I don't know that I came home kind of burnt out particularly. I guess some of it's hard because around the time that I was in the jobs that kind of took the most toll on me was also around the time I became a parent. So I guess it's hard to delineate where the burnout came from, to the fact that I was sleeping an hour a night and then going to work all day, or was it the work itself that was causing the problem? But yeah, that was a very difficult time because there was one job in particular where I was doing nothing that I was good at and everything that I wasn't good at. And that was a very long 11 months while I tried to leave to get back to a job where I at least was good at some of the job. And yeah, those are the kind of decisions that, I look back on and can see how much difficulty they caused for me. A lot of my memories of that job are of lunchtime, walking around, listening to music and audiobook just on my own, regulating before going back again and getting back to the nightmare.
Yeah, basically trying to survive at every
Yeah,
corner.
yeah, it was very much that.
And going back about, you growing up, you mentioned like the difficulties in maintaining relationships.
Yeah.
And how does that feel for you? Because, you mentioned that you were never the social butterfly, but you still feel the need of having friends, that social connection. So, how is that feeling of a push pull?
Yeah, it's probably one of the hardest things I'd say about being autistic is that need for social interaction and need to not have social interaction and to try and balance those two things. It's a classic thing of feeling hurt that you didn't want to be invited, but you didn't get invited to a party, but you didn't want to go to the party, but you're still hurt that you weren't invited to the party. And if you were invited to the party, thinking, oh God, what am I going to do? I can't go to this party. I don't want to go. What excuse can I give? Which means that you then don't get invited to parties because people know you won't show up. And it's a vicious circle that kind of goes round and round. And especially if you're undiagnosed, you don't understand why you're like this. Everyone else loves going to parties. Everyone else loves going out when they're at university, drinking, going to nightclubs. And I never enjoyed or wanted to do any of that. So yeah, that makes it hard to make friends, to maintain friends. And then, when you move on from a situation where you made the friends, if it's a school or university or a job, and you're not got that day-to-day interaction anymore, it's not finding that way to stay in touch that feels genuine, and yeah, that you understand the rules of what the relationship is now, how often you're meant to message, how often you're not meant to message. And I think too often I've erred on the side of not messaging, and then the friendships just drifted off into the ether. And you don't really know why, even though you've played an active role in that kind of allowing it to drift off.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is difficult because there's a lot of people that I've known in my life that I wish I was still in day-to-day contact with, but I'm not, and probably haven't spoken to them for years. And I still think about them, and I still feel like they're my friends, but I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what's going on in their lives. And yeah, it is a hard thing. And
Yeah.
I've seen it linked to something called object permanence, where if something or someone isn't in front of you all the time, you don't think about them as much as, say, a neurotypical person would, which is a hard thing to explain. You can't tell someone that you're friends with that you don't think about them very often, because that sounds like a horrible thing to say. And it's not that you don't care about them, it's just your brain works in a different way.
Yeah. It's just something that happened to me like over the weekend. It's somebody that I care about a lot,
Yeah,
somebody that has been in my life since I was 14, but I haven't spoken to her in 4 years since I've
yeah,
got my son because, one thing or another, it didn't happen. But for me, nothing changed to the point that when I spoke to her again, it was like no time has passed. And it's difficult to explain. And as you said, like, you can't really put it into words because whatever you try to say comes out as harsh. You're like, no, I really just want to explain how it works in my head. But yeah, no, I completely second what you said.
yeah.
How it is being a parent of a neurodivergent son, and you said you had two children. Are they both neurodivergent?
Yeah, my youngest son's not got any diagnoses yet. He's on the pathway for an ADHD diagnosis. So, maybe by the time he's married with kids, he'll have a diagnosis. But yeah, they're very both clearly neurodivergent. So it's interesting because it's hard to compare to anything else because you've never known anything else, and that can be
Mm,
why neurodivergent parents sometimes aren't the quickest to get their kids assessed because they don't know any different. We look at how they interact with people and we see it through our own lens of perhaps undiagnosed neurodivergence, so we think that's normal. So then when someone points it out and says that maybe they're autistic, you think, what? Well, that's what I did. I'm not autistic, but of course I was. So yeah, it, there's a there's kind of two ways it goes, really. Being autistic and having autistic children, you can empathize with them and you can understand their struggles. But there's also the side that it can be hard to manage your own needs whilst also managing theirs. Which is true of any parenting, obviously. But if you're still understanding your own traits and your own challenges as an late diagnosed neurodivergent person, understanding how you can best be there for your children and meet their needs and challenges and traits whilst looking after yourself. Yeah, it's a struggle.
yeah.
And it's a struggle that I talk to my own clients about when I'm working as a counsellor. So I know what it's like.
And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is about regulation, because I made regulation as the core of my coaching practice. Because when I turned into coaching neurodivergent individuals, one of the things that I've noticed is that the traditional coaching, it doesn't work. And there has to be this element of constant regulation that goes, into cycles of, yeah, you have a burst of activity, but then you have to regulate again because we need that. How does that work for you, both at work and as a parent?
Yeah. So at work, regulation is probably easier nowadays since the pandemic. Because obviously, before the pandemic, I worked 5 days a week in the office, and that was it. So that's just what you do. So during the pandemic, it was working at home, and since then, it's been a mixture. So I work a 4 day week, 2 days in the office, and 2 days at home. So that helps to regulate because when I'm at home, I'm in my own space. I get to listen to records while I work, limited social interactions and everything just, feels easier. It's nice to be in the office 2 days a week to have that social interaction, but I find it increasingly tiring when I'm in the office. So I don't know how I'd cope if Nigel Farage got his way and everyone had to go back to working full time in the office. I think I would find that a real struggle. So that's how I regulate. And I've always regulated by going out on my own at lunchtime, being the antisocial guy who goes off with his headphones on and doesn't meet for lunch with all his colleagues all the time, like everyone else seems to do. I've always needed that time to just go wander, look at the shops, listen to something on my headphones. And that was always what I needed. I didn't understand that I needed it, but it was what I did. At home, at home, it's a difficult balance as a parent to find that time to regulate.
Hmm.
Something that I always liked to do when I was young was to get up early and go downstairs and watch TV on my own. And I still like doing that. And now that my kids are a little bit older, they both sleep in a bit more instead of waking up at 5 o'clock and making me watch CBBS. So I kind of get that time back now where I can go downstairs and watch a film. Luckily I've got a cat that wakes me up early wanting food. So it doesn't matter what day of the week it is, I'm awake at 6. And I do enjoy that time. That's kind of my time to regulate. But yeah, it's something I've always struggled with is making that time and not kind of planning that time and then giving it away because someone wants me to do something.
And we talked about your career as a football journalist,
Yeah.
that is what you wanted to do. What made you pivot now towards the counseling?
Yeah. So the journey kind of started about 5, 6 years ago. No, probably more than that now. About 6, 7, 8 years ago. And it was actually a blog post I read, a website for introverts. Because at that point, I didn't have my diagnosis. I didn't have any real thought about being autistic, but I knew I was an introvert. So, I kind of read about that, and that helped me to kind of come to terms with myself and my challenges and why I'm just a quiet person. And I read a blog post from a woman who pivoted her career in her 40s from working in marketing, which is what I was doing, to become a counsellor, and how that job was perfect for her as an introvert because she could work for herself. She could just have these deep, intense one-on-one conversations, which introverts and autistic people love to have, rather than sitting in a meeting room with 20 people, not saying anything, not contributing, and going away feeling ashamed, which is what I was doing far too much at that point in my life. So I thought, wow, that does actually sound wonderful. I could do that. And I'd had counselling a few years before that. So I got in touch with my counsellor and asked her how she got into doing it, because she'd also pivoted from a career, I think it was in sales, to become a counsellor. So that kind of gave me a route to follow. So I started doing an evening course at college, which took place over about 4 years through the pandemic. And it was hard work to balance that with a full-time job and parenting, but it was worth it and I enjoyed it. And every time I did it, every time I kind of did some actual counselling work, it felt right and it felt like it was, what I wanted to do. So last year, I was able to start up my own private practice with the help of my employers, who allowed me to change my hours to free up one day a week where I could start working on it. And yeah, so I started doing that last year, working with autistic clients, and it's going well so far.
And what are the things that you've seen the most through, your counseling autistic clients? What is the struggle that they report more of?
I guess a major theme is the kind of working out what they want to be, what they want to do, what makes them happy, which, is a common theme in counseling because, we all start off as our own organismic selves, to use counseling jargon, and then other people's values and opinions start to shift us and make us turn into things that we're not. And one of the core parts of counselling is to help people get back to that understanding of who they really are, what they really want to do, what they really want to be, and what makes them happy. And that aligns quite well with the unmasking side of neurodivergence, because that's essentially the same thing. It's understanding who you really are, stripping away the layers of social expectations that are so damaging, especially for autistic people, because we have to pretend not to be autistic to think that we can survive in the world. But that doesn't make us happy because it takes us away from who we want to be. So, if you've got people who are going out drinking and, socializing because they think that's what they want to do, but they don't actually want to do that. It's helping them to understand that if that's not what they want to do, it doesn't make them happy. Why are they doing it? Who is it for? Things like that. So those are the main themes that I've come across so far working with autistic clients. It's that helping people to reflect on what they want, what makes them happy.
And what about mental health? Because this is something else that, there is a lot that has been discussed in social media. You see a lot of people saying, I've been misdiagnosed for many years
Yeah,
as depression, anxiety, you name it. And then your diagnosis of whatever, autism, ADHD, ODHD comes in, and you realize that, yeah, there probably is some sort of depression, but that comes with the burden of navigating a world that is set for neurotypicals when you're neurodivergent and you don't even know that you are.
yeah.
So, what is your experience in counseling in respect to that?
Yeah, I mean, another thing I've noticed so far is that people have come to me because they wanted to have a counsellor who was autistic. So someone who gets it, basically. And a lot of them have had experiences with neurotypical counsellors where they've not felt understood, where struggles they've had have been blamed on trauma. And that's quite a common theme across autistic people when they come into contact with kind of the mental health sector, is that, their experiences are put down as being traumatic, and they are traumatic, but the trauma was caused because they were neurodivergent people interacting with a world that wasn't made for them. And that is traumatic. The trauma didn't cause the traits caused the trauma. And if you're, an autistic person in therapy and your counselor doesn't get that way round, then it's not going to work for you because they're not going they're effectively trying to change you from being who you actually are to being who society thinks you are. And that's what caused the trauma in the first place. So, I do think it's important for clients who are autistic or have ADHD or any other neurodivergent kind of strand to try and find people who understand that. They don't necessarily need to be autistic themselves, but they need that understanding. Otherwise, you do get so much in the way of misdiagnosis. A lot of autistic women in particular, it seems, who get diagnosed late on, report kind of diagnoses of BPD or things like that. But turned out not to be the case. They were just autistic. But that was overlooked because the diagnostic criteria is not efficient in that way for women because it wasn't designed looking at women.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a big factor.
And, for somebody that is autistic and it's navigating mental health issues, I think there is like an additional struggle because you get to the point where you say, okay, I need some help. I need somebody to support me. And then you have all these very traumatic experiences, as you mentioned, right? Because they don't get you, and then you say the same things over and over again, but the situation doesn't change. That is very dangerous, I think, because then you lose trust in the
Yeah,
process. You
exactly.
don't want help anymore because you think that it's completely useless and you're tired of exposing yourself like that. So, for somebody out there that finds themselves in this situation right now, what would you suggest? What would you recommend to them?
I think it's finding the right person for you because the counselling relationship is so important when it comes to healing for everyone. This isn't an autistic thing. You need to have someone that you feel safe with and someone who you feel understands you. So, it's looking for people who will get it. And, there is a an autistic therapist's directory that you can find online where you can have a look at different people, because there's lots of us out there who are autistic and work as counsellors, and then talk to as many as you can and try and get that relationship before you start the actual counselling, because most counsellors will offer a free kind of initial phone call or video call, and then you can work out which person feels safe for you to open up to. This is all based on the assumption that you can access private counselling, of course, which isn't the case for everyone. The waiting lists and realities of going through the NHS are difficult. So, it's not an easy solution for everyone.
And for those that are stuck in that cycle of waiting, not knowing what's happening through the NHS, what is one piece of advice that you'd like to give them?
I guess you know, if that's the only route you have in terms of actual counselling, it's trying to find your people. There's a lot of autistic communities online, there's lots of people on social media, and it's very validating to share your experiences with other people who get it, even if it's not in terms of therapeutic process. I go into Spectrum Gaming events. I know how powerful it is just for other send parents to get together, because it can feel so isolating being a parent of a child with special educational needs and disabilities, because it feels like you're the only one struggling with all the things that everyone else finds easy. And that's a good summary of what life is like if you're autistic. It can feel like everyone apart from you has got the instruction manual for life and they're just doing it, and you find everything difficult. But one good thing that the internet has brought is the ability for people to connect, and to find other people like them and get that reassurance that you're not alone, because no one has to be alone.
Thank you, James. It's been so powerful. I really I feel this very close to my heart,
Yeah.
because the more I think about people struggling, with mental health and not having the right support, it breaks my heart. And in a way, I think I'm going through the reverse phase of what you have experienced, because I've had my diagnosis for combined ADHD, and now I'm going through the loops of saying, maybe I'm autistic too,
Yeah.
because all of a sudden, I think my autistic traits are becoming more and more present. So when I think about people struggling, and, I've been very lucky because I've been able to access private mental health care. I've been able to access the private diagnosis. And I think, what if I didn't have that? Because I've accessed that in a very dark moment of my life. And I often reflect back as to what would have happened if I didn't have that opportunity. And it's scary. It's really scary. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is to create another opportunity for people to reach out, to create a community, to have people that they can go and reach out and talk to. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing all of that.
It's okay.
I really, really appreciate it.
No problem.
I will end with a slighter, funnier note, which
Okay.
which are the signature questions for the podcast.
Okay.
And the first one is, what are two traits, or even just one, that you really love about yourself, and the ones that you really still struggle with?
Yeah. So I've had a think about this, and I think for the positive one, I'm going to go back to my counselling course. And towards the end of the course, we were asked to kind of give positive feedback about each other. And it was a really lovely kind of session where everyone got to share what we felt about each other in a very, affirming and positive way. And the two things that got mentioned the most for me, one was empathy. And, I do think that's a trait that, obviously has led to my kind of counselling direction. And it's something that, does come up at work as well when I get feedback. So yeah, empathy would definitely be one of the traits. It's an interesting one for autistic people, because there's the myth that autistic people don't have empathy, which, is very much not the case. We may sometimes struggle to express that empathy in ways that people recognize. So yeah, empathy is one, and the other was a sense of humor. And I think that's a really important tool to have in life, because life is hard. And if you can't laugh and smile at some of the hard bits, then it becomes overwhelming. So, I do try to bring humor into most things that I do. And sometimes I'm successful. So in terms of something I struggle with, I think it's an ADHD trait in particular, is kind of impulse control. In my whole life, I've been an overspender. I have lots of hobbies and interests, and yeah, the ability to make myself not go out to a record shop and buy 5 or 6 records is something I've always struggled with. So it's a constant battle to rein that in and be responsible instead of going for the dopamine hit of a new shiny thing.
Yeah. And another signature question is, how do you feel about chit chats?
Yeah, I struggle with chit chat, definitely. I'm a counsellor because I like having those deep conversations. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but talking about the weather and where I'm going on holiday, I struggle with that, definitely.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, me too. One last question, and it's, if there is anything else that you would like for people to hear, for somebody that has listened so far to this episode, is there anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, I guess I'd sum it up with the message that I want to give out through what I do in counselling. My counselling practice is called You Are Enough. And I think that's the message that I always want to get out to people, which is that, especially autistic people, the world is hard and it's not made for us. So on a daily basis, we're made to feel like we're not enough. We don't try hard enough. We're not social enough. We're not fun enough. But we are enough as ourselves, because that's all we can be. And trying to be more than that is where we get into difficulties and feel bad about ourselves. So yeah, that would be my message, is that everyone listening is enough as themselves.
Thank you so much, James. Like
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this talk,
Yeah, me too.
as deep as it went, like it was exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, good.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Suspicious Brain podcast will come back soon with a new episode and new stories to share. So stay tuned and follow me now, before you forget.